button. Thank you. The meeting recording is in progress. Thank you.
It fills up my computer, you know this, Jackie.
Sorry?
It fills up my computer, you know this. That's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to run through. It looks like we've got another staff governor joined us here.
Hi, it's Solomon here.
Oh, hi, Solomon.
I was invited to this meeting to discuss medical rota, but I don't think I'm in the right meeting. So I apologize for this, and I'm going to leave you now.
It was nice to see you, Solomon. Yeah, that's nice.
Sorry, Solomon. You're keeping well.
Hi, Solomon.
You're keeping great, thanks. I hope you are. Thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Solomon. Okay.
It's like walking into the wrong meeting room, isn't it?
That's now virtually. I think that's the first. Well, actually, yes, I've known that happened before. I must admit, yeah. Okay, that's great. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us at this Council of Governors meeting. Obviously, I'm conscious for governors it's quite a long afternoon, so we'll try and keep it interesting and moving speedily along for you. You'll have had your own governors pre-meet, and then, of course, we've just had just over an hour, a good over an hour, with non-exec directors in excellent quality conversations. So thanks to all of you for attending and to non-execs for their support. Alistair, I know you're here now with us as well, Alistair Goldman, so welcome, Alistair.
I am here.
I've seen it yet. Nice to have you with us. Thank you. Yeah. So just for the record, colleagues around the table, exec directors, thanks for joining us. We have governors Amit, Dermot, Mark, Alan, Pauline, Alistair, Stella, Tariq, Wendy, Kavita, Hardev, David and Helen with us. I don't think I've missed any out, have I? Did I miss a name? Hopefully not. So that's the governors that are with us. We have all of our available non-exec directors, I think, are with us. So we've got John and Trudy and Mohammed and Julie and Laura and Barry. We have apologies from Selena. So if we note them, that's great. And then I'll just check with the exec directors. Perhaps you just give me a wave so that I can see if you're here. But Mel, I think I've seen. Yes, thank you, Mel. Yeah. And John, I can see as well. Yeah. Hiya, John. That's great. Sandra, is Sandra with us? No. And Saj, is Saj with us? Yeah. Hiya, Saj. That's great. So, Saj, I'll maybe get you to say hello and introduce yourself to colleagues in a moment. That'd be great. And Paul Southern, is Paul with us? Lovely. That's great, Paul. Thank you. And Karen, I've seen, I think. Yeah. Hiya, Karen. And Matthew's here as well. That's great. Great. So we've got a full turnout, actually, of the exec directors, with the exception of the Chief Medical Officer, Brian. Of course, we look forward to hopefully finding his replacement tomorrow. Paul Southern, can I just bring to your attention a couple of items that were raised during the course of our discussions? If you're not able to answer them today, then that's I quite understand, of course. A couple of matters were raised that it might just be worth you, if you can, saying anything about later, or if you can't, perhaps you'd come back to us. We talked a little about EPR system gaps, and it was particularly to do with nursing and care plans. And we understood that to be some sort of audit or investigation and a gap in the EPR system that we weren't, although we were clear there was a gap, we weren't clear on the potential impact of that gap. So an EPR system gap in nursing and care plans. And the second thing was the accuracy of information provided at the command centre. And there was a little bit of noise about a suggestion of a problem with completely accurate information coming into the command centre, and therefore how well it could actually direct our activity in terms of its required function. So there were two things that were raised. Obviously, non-execs did everything they could to explain what we knew, but I did say that I would raise them with you, Paul. Are there things you would prefer to hold and respond later, or do you want to say anything about them now?
I was going for the first one I'm happy to mention, and then the second one I probably need a bit more information to understand. So the first one you mentioned was nursing and care plan gap in EPR. that's not an unexpected gap. That's on the scope, this gap.
Yeah.
When we built the EPR, it was intentional. We couldn't do everything all at once. And some things were left out, so certain care plans were left out. There was a decision made that it should be confluent care plans left out rather than bits of things, so people weren't jumping around. I think what we're doing now, so we've started some work to look at that gap, because one of the other things that was advised was that we were told that after a couple of years, things that we thought we needed, because we were living in a paper world, we actually wouldn't need. And to a greater or lesser extent, that's correct. You know, there was any number of documents that were produced in the days of paper where, you know, you'd have a pathway for a liver biopsy, and it would have somebody's weight on it and their allergy status all repeatedly put in. And of course, you don't need that anymore because it's in one place on EPR and it's available. So that's the reason we didn't put all the care plans in straight away. So Kate Pagan, who's my Chief Nursing Information Officer colleague, is doing work looking at that gap, and we are hopeful that we start to look at that. We're also doing some work where we're putting care plans in. So, for example, as part of the CMD emergency care work, we've got 4 care plans that are currently being built for some of the commonest conditions that we encounter there, to make sure that we have, you know, good care, reproducible care. There's no variation in care. So they're all being done. So it is something that's being addressed, but it is, Max and colleagues, it is slow work. It's not quick work. It requires a lot of thought to see how it fits in. So we are doing that, and it's recognised in the risk register, but we're going at a pace to try and get this looked at. With regard to access to information in the command centre, I can only presume there has been a problem in the last week with an issue with some information on the deteriorating patient tile. That's being addressed by Nautilus, who provide the information, and GE. And the fixes are going in, and we are hopeful that by Monday things will be in place. From a patient safety point of view, I'm happy, and I've discussed this with the acting chief medical officer, that there's adequate mitigation in place with our other systems, so using Cerner natively to ensure safety of the patients, and that we're not acting on the wrong information there.
Perfect.
You know, I'd answer any direct questions about any specifics people are worried about with accuracy of information in the command centre, recognising that, of course, the information in the command centre is only as good as the information put into the system by the humans, by our colleagues out there. So,
that's perfect. I'll stop you there if you don't mind, because that has definitely provided the context that was just perhaps missing a little at the previous meeting. So thank you so much for that. And sorry to put you on the spot as well. I did appreciate if you wanted to come back to that. So that was extremely helpful context. Thanks very much. I'll just ask 2 colleagues to introduce themselves. For Pat Campbell, we have Pat's deputy here, Fahim. So would you like to introduce yourself, Fahim?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Fahim Lal. I'm Associate Director of HR, deputising Pat today, who's engaged in another meeting.
Lovely. Thanks very much, and thanks for joining us, Fahim. Yeah, and we're delighted to welcome our new Chief Operating Officer to his first meeting with the governors. So, Saj, would you like to say hello?
Hi, thanks, Max. Hi, everybody. Afternoon. So it's Sajid Azeb. I've come across from Leeds Teaching Hospital, where I've been for the last 4.5 years as the Deputy Chief Operating Officer. And it's great to be here on day 4 at the moment. So, yeah, one of my first meetings.
Yeah. Fantastic, Saj. Thanks very much, and a warm welcome. I'm sure governors will join me in welcoming you to the trust, and it's great to have you here in such an important role.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you. And so, can I just check? We might have Laura Partons with us.
Can I just make a comment?
You can, Alan.
He looks far more handsome, and he's got a really good start at the place.
He's matured since you last saw him.
Yeah. So, Alan, I know you're having some connection troubles. That came through loud and clear, but it's nothing like what you said before when it was just the governors. Saj, it was extremely complimentary of you.
Thank you for that, Alan.
That's great. And Laura, I just want to welcome you, Laura, and you might just want to say a word in introduction to Governor colleagues, please. Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't get off mute there. Hi everybody, I'm Laura Parsons. I'll be joining the Trust on the 16th of November as Associate Director of Corporate Governance and Board Secretary.
Wonderful, Laura, thanks. And we're really looking forward to you being here. We have another month to wait, unfortunately, because of notice period. But Laura will make such a difference to us, and of course will become you Governor's key contact in the Trust for inquiries that you may have. Jackie and I think Sheridan will be working to Laura, eventually up to, under John Holden's command. So Laura, it'll be fantastic to have you here, and thanks for taking the time to join us as an observer today. It's good to have you with us. Yeah, thanks very much. Okay, Governor, so what we'll do is we'll get on with the business of the day. Having satisfied ourselves regarding the minutes and any matters arising, you'll have the Chairman's report, the report from the Nominations and Remuneration Committee, stuff about NED appointment and NED appraisals process. You should have all these things hopefully sent to you with the papers. And NHS providers Governor Advisory Committee elections. So that's kind of the transactional stuff for the governors to see to. We've then got a great opportunity to hear from Mel, and importantly, Mel, I think will be bringing to our attention the situation that colleagues are working under at the moment, both at the wider system area and certainly with the Trust. And then we welcome input from John Holden, and John will be telling us about People Partners in Place, which is our interim strategy going forward. And I know that matters to many governors. It's been raised with me a few times as to some clarity as to where we're going, at least medium term max. And developing our corporate governance model. And you've already heard from the non-exec directors how encouraged we are by the way that's going, and the risks that we know we have to address. But there's John's going to talk us through ward-to-board assurance and the way in which we're going to get serious about outstanding as a hospital trust. Okay. There's then some reports for you to know, Regulation Committee and Audit and Assurance Committee. And I should ask at this point, does anybody bring any other business that they need me to make time for, please? Okay, in the absence of anything being said there, I'm going to assume we can get through that lot in the next couple of hours, then we'll have done well and we'll have achieved our objectives. Knowing what the agenda is, are there any particular declarations of interest that need to be made now? Thankfully, Alan revealed his previous knowledge of SAD, so that's good. We got that, but there's no particular declarations of interest to us. So again, if it arises during the course of the discussions, please tell me. We met as a Council of Governors on the 16th of July 2020, and it's great, by the way, that we've been able to keep those things going. So can I check, please, whether there is any matters of inaccuracy or amendment required of our minutes held on the 16th of July, please? And just a comment there from Mark about the practical point. Papers, can we use a better quality envelope? So there may be some problems with the posting out. We'll have a look at that, certainly, Mark, of course. No, thank you for raising that, yeah. And anything else? There's no hands raised. So I'm going to take those as a true record, if that's okay. At this point, by the way, you did hear me switching the record on at Jackie's instruction. Can I just advise you, please, colleagues, Governor colleagues, that the meeting is being recorded in order to keep an accurate record of this meeting, but also, in the spirit of transparency, this is a public meeting. We do intend actually to upload this onto YouTube. So there will be a recording of this meeting available for people to see. It's the right thing to do. We need to remain transparent and open to the public. And that's the way that we're trying to achieve that at the moment, when we can't actually sit together and invite whoever wants to come in and join us and listen. Okay, so that's the situation there. The matters arising from the Council of Governors meeting held in July. Hopefully colleagues have got a copy of that list of actions. So the first thing to be mentioned is an action to be held over, which is our desire really to try and grip this draft membership plan and to bring more people into our circle, our circle of information, and to work across the huge number of members, thousands of members that we've actually got as a foundation trust. Jackie, is there anything more you'd want to say about that? We realise it's obviously been delayed due to our current working circumstances. So you have the microphone now, Jackie.
Yeah, this is one item that we'll be picking up with Laura when she starts, and so hopefully we'll see more action on that front then. We are looking to kind of re-establish the Governor's engagement programme, so in and amongst we'll include sessions around membership development.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Jackie. And the second action, Jackie, also sits with yourself, and it's to do with the session on Governor's Code of Conduct that we're just trying to arrange at the moment.
And again, what we're looking at is when Laura starts, we're looking to establish some sessions around dealing with the Code of Conduct. We did actually try and get hold of NHS providers to do a bespoke session for us, but the dates just weren't compatible with ourselves here, so they couldn't deliver it in time for, kind of prior to this meeting. So we'll be looking to do the same a little later on, but I think, kind of once Laura's in post, it would be good to work with her to get, kind of steers from her about how to progress this, to get something back to Council of Governors in January when they meet.
That's great, Jackie, thank you. So you can assure Governors that it's underway.
Yeah.
The third of the 6 actions relates to the AGM and the annual members meeting, and of course that was the intention to pull together a Governor working group to work on the Governor input into that. I think we can happily say that's concluded, and I'll maybe just ask David if you would wish to say anything about the AGM generally, David, and the Governor input into that.
I think we discussed this in our private meeting earlier on. I think generally the content was very well received. People were very pleased with that, I think. On the technical side, some of the sound wasn't very good for people dialing in. So, for instance, a suggestion about using wireless mics in the future. I think that was about it. Yeah, I think that was about it. When Pauline's heard from a little bit of feedback about the Doncaster AGM, where I think she said there were 10,000 people access the meeting, which sounds incredible, really. And she's hopefully going to get some feedback more formally from the GAC on that.
Yeah.
Maybe Pauline just like to confirm that.
I know the chair there actually. She lives locally. So I will inquire of her as to whether that's a true figure. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that's right. The chair just reported, but I think it was actually streamed. So I think that the amount of views were over 10,000. But I know you know the chair very well, so you can link in with her, and she's going to send me the information.
That's great, Pauline. Yeah. Thanks very much. Yeah, I mean that's certainly transparent if that's the case, isn't it?
They used a video, and as a result of that, they actually linked in with questions and just try and get different members just to be able to pose the question, but they did it in a creative way. So
great.
Share that information.
We'll try and learn from that. That's great. Okay, thank you. So again, colleagues, I'm going to suggest that action can be shown as concluded. The next 2 items are suggested on today's agenda. The first is from the Chief Executive's report and restart phase and developments. I think that's item 12. And the second of which, action 15, large-scale fundraising projects. I felt Governors would want to be briefed on our latest charity initiative, and Karen has kindly agreed to provide some further detailed information for Governors today at that item 14. And then finally, the Chief Executive's report. So this was Mel, during the course of her update to you, suggested that you might want to hear more about Happy, Healthy at Home. Now, I've noted that that's still to be scheduled, but I don't know whether that's the sort of thing, John, that you might be weaving seamlessly into your presentation today, Happy, Healthy at Home, or will we be thinking of a separate kind of briefing on that?
I don't think I can do full justice to it, but Actors 1 and our system work is the way in which we deliver Happy Healthy at Home. So yes, I can certainly make the connection, but I wasn't planning for this to be a Happy Healthy at Home presentation per se. But everything we do is the way in which we contribute.
Thanks very much, John. Yeah, I suspect, Mel, you thought it was well worth some detailed input into governance. And so, should we hold this over, Mel? What do you
yes,
think?
if we could. I think it was more about the Actors 1 and the changes to Actors 1. So there is a launch planned in October, after which we can, for the next Council of Governors, perhaps do a presentation on Actors 1.
Terrific. That's fine. So that's what we'll do. Thanks very much for that, Mel, and we will hold that over, Jackie, and amend it to show as being on the next Council of Governors meeting. It's an important way about the way that we work. Okay, thank you. Colleagues, there's a summary report from the closed Council of Governors meeting held on the 16th of July. Can I ask whether there's any matters of inaccuracy or amendment that I need to note there, please? And don't forget to use the hands raised if you wish to, but I'll take it that there's nothing there. That's fine. Okay, so we'll take that as a true record, and we've dealt with matters arising. So I think, shall we go now then to item 6, please, and take the chairman's report. Okay, Alan, can I just be sure? I'm not sure if you're waving at me there or you're just having some technical problems. Are you okay, Alan?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm having technical problems.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, that's fine. So I'll mute that, that's fine. Okay, so moving to the chairman's report. Well, obviously, the first thing I want to mention in that at Council of Governors is to formally congratulate our colleague Tom Lawton on the award of his MBE. It's fantastic news, and typically Tom, his response and all his public utterings have emphasised the fact that it was a team effort and that it was to do with the ethos and atmosphere that he was working in, that he was able to achieve as much as he did in the early days of COVID and leading to his award. I wrote to Tom on behalf of the board of directors, congratulating him, and I got a lovely response from him, which again was typical of the man. In that he really emphasised the team working aspect of that. I asked whether he minded if I shared that reply, and I've done that. And I think if you haven't already seen it, you'll be getting that today. I think Jackie may have arranged that, and you'll see Tom's reply. It's quite enlightening, really. And I also would suggest it offers a view of the atmosphere that's been created by our executive colleagues at the Trust, in which people can flourish and work as teams and get things done. So I would honestly, commend reading Tom's response to you as governors, and I think it says a lot about where we're going as a Trust. So very, very pleasing and wonderful news, of course, for Tom. I won't talk too much as chairman about the current pressures everybody's under, because I know Mel will be covering that. You'll know, governors, that we arranged for you to receive a daily situation report. So in the spirit of trying to keep you updated as to the key numbers of inpatients in the Trust, and I'm sure you'll have seen what they are at the moment. They are significantly rising. And those of you that are keeping an eye on the news, we're all wondering whether Bradford is going to become Tier 3, or I don't know whether anybody knows whether that's been decided or not yet. I've just had a Sky News notification that Manchester leaders unanimously reject moving to Tier 3. I don't know whether that means they're rejecting it, but it's happening, or whether it's been rejected as whole, but we'll see, won't we? So perhaps Mel will have more for us on that, but we're in clearly a very challenging second wave, and we recognise the impact that has on our exec colleagues and all staff at the Trust. For my report, I perhaps just bring to your attention, as I said, the Trust's YouTube channel. So we're going to publish this particular meeting. I want to commend Pauline Garnett at this meeting for her article written for Governor Focus. Again, Pauline, I shared that with colleagues at the Board of Directors. It was a very insightful look at what it's like to be a staff governor during such a time of a global pandemic. but also it was written in such a way that it made me feel very proud to be part of Bradford's Trust, Pauline. So thank you for that. And I know Governor colleagues have seen that, and I think it reflected very well on us. So thank you.
I received a message from NHS provider just to say that they were really impressed by the commitment and the response from not only from me, but also from my colleagues that they've shown to patients each during the COVID-19 emergency. You said well done.
That's great. It's great to pass that on, Pauline. Thank you. It's very much appreciated. At the end of page 2 of my report, at section 5, I just want to thank Dermot and Kavita for what you're about to do, and Dermot for what you've done. So for governor involvement in stakeholder panels. So it's interesting. I had a conversation with a fellow governor earlier today that, you know, these appointments, chief information officer and chief medical officer, they are entirely exec appointments. It's a matter for myself and the exec team as to who is appointed. But we take a position here where we run a stakeholder panel, and colleagues will know that all those candidates are aware of the importance of that stakeholder panel and their ability to engage a group of people. When I discussed with some governors at the earlier meeting we had, the informal meeting a week or so ago, I did hear, and I promise I heard, that the stakeholder panels were thought to be excellent, but could in fact perhaps be a little longer. So I did pick up on that, and I've passed that to Pat Campbell today. And Fahim, I'd maybe ask you to just put that in the back of your mind, that there seems to be a lot of benefit from testing a candidate's ability to engage and discuss over a slightly longer period of time in the stakeholder panel. And Mel and I, as we move forward to the Chief Medical Officer's interviews tomorrow, will be taking very seriously the feedback from the stakeholder panel. So thanks again for that. The last things I would just say are just pulling out 2 points from the quarterly meeting with governors. The new governance structure, which obviously will be raised by John today, and the hospital charity campaign. So I hope as chairman, governor colleagues are seeing that I'm trying to pick up what I'm hearing and to make sure that that's turned around and you're hearing some input into those. So my thanks go to John and Karen for providing the exec input into those things. Council of Governors, you're asked to note the report. If there are no questions for me, I'll assume you'll do that, and we'll move to the other items on the list. Okay. I see no hands raised, no waving, so that's fine. We'll move on to Nominations and Remuneration Committee report. Wendy, I think you're leading on that, and we do have a paper.
Yes. Oh, hi. Yes, the paper's in front of you. We'd like to welcome 2 new members to the committee. That's Alistair Goldman and Amit Bhagwat, who are very welcome members. We've managed to keep it as a sort of reasonable level so that we can engage easily between us when we have issues and when we're discussing things. Basically, we've been concerned over, since the last meeting in July, with the recruitment of non-executive director and the shortlisting. We had really good response. So we had a lot of response to the advertisement. The headhunters we used were very, very good. And we decided on an interview process, which actually included a stakeholder panel, which I think is the first time we've used that for non-executive director appointment, along with the interview panel. So we decided on that. I think Max is actually going to report back on the appointment itself. So I won't steal his thunder on that, and also on the appraisal system, which is something else that Max reported back to us at the NRC. So that's really what we've been doing. It doesn't sound much, but it seemed to be a very busy summer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so basically you're asked to note the report.
There you go, somebody likes it, Wendy. Okay, so colleagues are asked to note the NRC report. There has been a significant amount of work actually, because obviously even to get the process running for Altaf's appointment that I'm going to tell you about is a lot of work. Does anyone have any questions of Wendy? And if not, I won't steal Jackie's thunder, because I know Jackie is going to talk us through the actual appointment and assure us that things were done properly and who came out as the successful candidate there, Jackie, yeah?
Yeah, I think I'm bearing in mind what Wendy's just said. I think because the paper does actually have you listed as presenter, Max, this was a paper that went to governors virtually for approval, or rather it's a summary of that paper. We've taken some detail out, but the governors received this paper along with other detailed information in order to make a decision about the appointment. And the purpose of the paper being on this agenda really is to have that decision formally read into the record of the Council of Governors, and just to kind of make transparent the process that was used, which was the process was in line with the process approved by the Council of Governors. So you have details there on, kind of the different stages that the governors went through, the NRC went through, the stakeholder panel, as Wendy has described. And I think you're right, Wendy, it is the first time that we've used the panel for a non-executive director appointment. We did use the stakeholder panel for the chair's appointment. Max, you'll probably remember that.
Yep.
But yeah, it's something that has worked really well. You've also got details there on the interview panel and who comprised the interview panel, as well as the deliberations, a report on the deliberations of the panel. All of this information will, of course, be included within the annual report, next year's annual report, regarding the NED appointments. And you can see that the decision of the Council of Governors, they actually have made an appointment before we release or formally release the name of the person. They are still kind of going through checks, the FPP checks, and so once all of those have completed, we can then go through releasing, making press releases and so on. I think the other thing that I wanted to point out about this report, which is something that we haven't necessarily included before, and which the governors from the NRC and I think a Council of Governors are particularly acutely aware of, is the makeup of the board of directors. And so very usefully, I think the Executive Search Agency also collected monitoring information that was fairly useful, I think, for the committee. And so making that available here in terms of, the candidates, as Wendy said, there were quite a lot of people who had applied, put an application in. So it's interesting to see, I think, the information in relation to that, and so on. But like I said, primarily this paper is about formally noting the decision of the Council of Governors, which was confirmed on Friday 21st of September regarding the approval of the appointment of the new non-executive director.
Thanks very much, Jackie. I've seen you as lead, Jackie, so I assume you were going to lead on that particular point. So thank you. You explained that very well. Any questions around the virtual table? We're happy to note and confirm the appointment. Yeah. Okay, that's great. And we'll look forward to welcoming the successful candidates, subject to the proper checks, as you said, Jackie. Yeah, thanks very much. Okay. And then the next item, item 9, is the non-exec director's appraisal process. I think it's part of my duty to inform you here that I've conducted appraisals with all 7 non-exec directors that stand at the moment. I have indeed passed feedback from yourselves as governors, as well as from executive colleagues, to those non-exec directors, and we discussed those in terms of development plans. We've spent quite a long time talking about the new governance arrangements and giving really strong non-executive director input into the work of the academies. It's actually significantly greater than it was previously as committees, because there's as many as 4 non-exec directors to working on academies. And what we tried to do was work on certainly an equitable share basis, but also many of the non-exec directors talked to me about areas that they wanted to stretch their own abilities in, but also areas where they felt very comfortable at really being able to give good quality guidance and steer in particular areas. So again, we tried to find a balance from that. So I think, again, I'm asking you please to consider this report and assure you that the non-exec director appraisals have taken place in line with the process which has been agreed by this Council of Governors in June 2020. Do anybody have any particular questions regarding the appraisals? Are you content to note that they've all been done and done in a timely fashion? Okay, thanks very much, everybody. And I'll move to the final matter on this item of transactional business. NHS providers, government advisory. Somebody coming in? Does somebody have a question? Oh, I thought somebody said, excuse me there. Maybe you're seeing it here. Okay. The last item is item 10, NHS providers, governor advisory committee elections. And Jackie, I think you were just going to bring to our attention some an opportunity here, but also some information regarding our current involvement in that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, governors, this information has been circulated to governors previously, I think, under separate cover as part of the Governor Focus newsletter. It is just drawing to your attention the forthcoming elections. They start their process very early. So at the moment, they're just seeking nominations. I won't go through all the detail because I think it's fairly straightforward within the paper. But we are allowed one governor per trust to put forward a nomination of one governor per trust. At the moment, Pauline Garnett is a governor that has been elected to the Governor Advisory Council. Just because you put forward a governor doesn't necessarily mean that they will be elected. There's a limited number of places. And so what the NHS providers will do is collate all the nominations, send them out in the same way that we do for our governor elections, and then there's a finite number of seats, and you know, kind of will appoint people in a nutshell to those seats based on the number of votes that are cast. So it's mainly to make the governors aware of the elections coming up. We do have a current incumbent, Pauline. Pauline, I suppose, along with, you know, kind of will make a decision as to whether she wishes to stand again. But if anybody does wish to nominate themselves, please read through all the available information about commitment and so on. And if you could let me have the confirmation of your wish to nominate yourself, not a statement, just your wish to nominate yourself, no later than the 26th of October on Monday. And then we can, you know, kind of proceed from there. We'll see how many people are interested, and we'll proceed from there. Okay.
Thank you, Jackie. So can I just say, I think it's absolutely great that Bradford are represented on that national body, the Governor Advisory Council. Pauline, I will just ask whether, do you want to say anything about the role or anything like that? Is there anything you'd wish to add to what Jackie said?
No, I just find it enlightening. It's really good just to get an idea about some of the good practices that are taking place, and to be able to contribute in a positive way, and to be able to share that you know, some of the initiatives back to Bradford, and also to raise our profile as well about what Bradford is doing. So you know, I think it's really enjoyable working with the team. I think the last time they had about 60 applicants for 8 places. So you know, we've done very well. You know, that Bradford is actually representative on a national scale.
Thanks very much, Pauline. Is there any reason why somewhere like Bradford couldn't have more than one?
Pardon?
It's quite okay, is it, to have more than one from a single area or trust?
They can only one.
Yeah, we have to narrow it down to one. We can make one nomination. We can only put forward one nomination max.
Yeah, but that's what I meant. We can have more than one governor on the Governor Advisory Council, can we?
No.
I see. So this would be following Pauline's tenure then?
Yes, yeah.
I see.
Okay. Elections are due, they're for the period 1st of April 2021 for 3 years. So Pauline's current tenure will end March 2021, 30th of March 2021.
I see. Okay, right. Thank you very much.
Can I just say that Pauline's
representation has been absolutely magnificent, and we need to support her.
Thanks for your kind comments. Thank you.
That's great, Anne. That's lovely. And of course, it's not appropriate of me to ask you whether you want to stand again, Pauline. I'll obviously leave that to you, unless you wish to share it with us.
No, I hope so.
You do, right? Well, that's actually useful for governors to know, then, isn't it? That you do intend to stand again. So, well, of course, it's an open opportunity, and should any others wish to put their names forward, that's great. But Pauline would love you to stay. Okay, you represent us very well there. Thank you, Pauline. Okay, so colleagues are content to note that, and thanks everybody. That's absolutely fine. Okay, good. Okay, so we now move to Mel, and opportunity for Mel to bring to our attention matters that the executive team and the board are considering to be particular priorities at the moment. So, Mel, thank you to you and the team for giving up your time this afternoon, and
thanks, Chairman. I have put in the chat box just to alert you, Chairman, that I have to leave at 4:50. So, if I may, I'm not going to give a massive long report today because I really wanted to be present for the conversation that follows around our strategy. So I'll try and pick up the very sort of salient and pertinent points. And reflecting on the minutes where we last met in July, the world feels a very different place. I mean, we were kind of heady with the prospect of coming out of the peak of COVID and applying our minds to how we might begin to return to a degree of normality and to reinstate services. And there was a long conversation about that. And then here we find ourselves in a very different situation once again, with large numbers of COVID patients dominating our acute bed base on the BRI site, and essentially squeezing out those patients that by now we would have hoped to have begun to provide more business as usual services to by way of investigation and elective procedures. But I'll start I'll return to that, but I'll start with the system and what's happening in the wider system, because I think it's always useful contextually just to share what's happening across West Yorkshire and Harrogate and the partnership that we are part of. So, and indeed the West Yorkshire Association of Acute Trusts. And in the last couple of months since we last met, there have been a couple of developments across WIAT, and that has been the approvals of 2 business cases that went through our respective boards for the implementation of a local laboratory management system, which supports the network laboratory interfaces between all the acute trusts across West Yorkshire and a network radiology system. So these are significant amounts of money that we've managed to secure from NHS improvement to enable that to happen, and ultimately will provide a much more resilient offer for both laboratory services and radiological reporting across all the trusts that are part of the partnership. It's also the case that the oversight function of the partnership in respect of COVID has continued, and in that vein, I report, I guess, to Rob Webster, who's the chief officer of the partnership, on a number of discrete areas. One of those is as the SRO for PPE for West Yorkshire, and I'm happy to report that as we are in the throes of this second surge of COVID, our stocks and supplies of PPE across the whole of West Yorkshire are much more secure and resilient and robust than they were in the first wave, due in part to the very welcome changes that have happened at national level in terms of the procurement and supplies pipeline of those, and that's enabled a stock to be built up both nationally, regionally within West Yorkshire. There's a central stock in Leeds, and indeed on this site we now have 2 weeks worth of resilience in store for the provision of all types of PPE for our staff looking after COVID patients. That was a place that we weren't in back in April and May. So that's very positive. The second role that I have is as the Senior Responsible Officer for Critical Care for West Yorkshire in support of the operational delivery network. And in that regard, I have worked with that team to identify by trust the extent to which critical care can be escalated in order to create additional capacity, which is much like we did back in April and May. This time we have created more robust and resilient ways of reporting and measuring that on a daily basis so that we can provide mutual aid between critical care units so as to try and alleviate some of the immediate problems that we might encounter. So a good example of that is over last weekend, we had quite a high demand for critical care. And rather than us think about, this was actually not last weekend, the weekend before, think about moving into our second ITU, what we did instead was, because essentially we didn't have the staff for a second ITU, was to transfer some patients to where there were beds and staff to look after them elsewhere in the network. So patients, we don't like to do this, we only do it really when we're forced to, but patients were transferred to Harrogate, and I think one was transferred to York. Since then, however, we have escalated into our second ITU and had cause to do that. And in common with other ITUs across the network, we are redeploying staff from elsewhere in our organisation to provide the appropriate skill and staffing numbers to support those patients. Now, what that does is have the impact, which is unavoidable, on our ability to continue to do operations and other surgical interventions, because for the most part, the staff who have the requisite skills to be able to support critical care patients, if they are not already working in critical care areas, the next best area that they're working in is theatres and theatre recovery. So we have to close down some of our operating capacity to transfer those staff into our critical care areas. And in relation to the Nightingale, people will be aware that there was a mention of the Nightingale earlier on this week. These are the temporary hospitals that were established in the first wave, and our nearest one of those is in Harrogate. Now, we never utilised Harrogate, nor did we have a need to, thankfully, because we had created sufficient resilience across the critical care networks to essentially consume our own smoke. We were able to cater for the needs of our populations in respect of COVID. And helpfully, the Nightingale was there just in case we became overwhelmed with demand. Because in the first wave, we knew very little about what to expect. Again, the Nightingale is available, and to that end, the Chief Executive in charge of the Nightingale is mobilising the standby staff just in case we would ever need to call upon the services of the Nightingale. There isn't a separate group of staff who are employed by the Nightingale Hospital. Each of the hospitals within the operating delivery network, part of Wyatt or beyond into the North East and Yorkshire region, have to contribute 1 or 2 or 3 staff each who have to be available should they need to mobilise quickly to open the Nightingale. But our real desire as a West Yorkshire partnership is not to have to call upon the needs of the Nightingale, because ultimately it just depletes staff that would otherwise be in our host organisations. In terms of place, I won't talk too much about that because I think we can save that for the Actors One presentation next time around. But I will just return to our current internal organisational issues around COVID. So, as I've alluded to, in July we were happily planning to return to some degree of normality, and we have very definitely had to put a pause on the implementation of those plans. And whilst we submitted to NHS England an activity plan that outlined the numbers of patients we intended to investigate who were on our waiting lists or list for operations, for which they've been waiting some considerable time. We were only ever really at the points of continuing to provide very urgent surgical interventions for those patients with time critical conditions. So those urgent patients and those with cancer for whom a delay in receiving treatment would be quite catastrophic and really would affect their longer term clinical outcomes. And that's where we find ourselves today. So our aspirations to do more and open up our theatres and run our ultra green pathways for COVID secure clinical environments to give people their hip replacements and their knee replacements and other surgical interventions that for which they've been waiting have had to be paused. Because today we find ourselves with 79 probable and positive COVID patients in our inpatient bed base. And as far as ITU is concerned, we have 8 COVID positive patients in addition to our non-COVID patients who require ITU. And interestingly, our number of non-invasive ventilation patients, these are the very, very sick COVID patients predominantly, who reside in our respiratory wards and our designated red COVID wards, receiving very complex respiratory support, but not necessarily mechanical ventilation, are 24 in number. Now, the last time we had that many, I'm just checking back on my report, was I think in April. So it feels very much like, in terms of the numbers, like we were right at the beginning of the peak of the last first wave of the pandemic. And that's having all sorts of operational impacts like I've just described. But the biggest, I think, really is on the staff and the morale of staff and their levels of anxiety and impacting in the manifestation of sickness rates and absenteeism, etc. There was an awful lot of hype, intrigue, excitement. The country was vested in the NHS and in supporting the NHS in the first wave of the pandemic, and it feels very different this time with competing demands. So a much more challenging scenario compounded by the impacts of winter and the potential for flu to manifest, as well as seasonal illnesses that would be the norm at this time of year. So we're doing an awful lot to try and support staff. And I'll come on because I know that there were a few specific questions that people had asked in advance. But just this afternoon, I've done the third of a very large meeting with 50, and previously we've had up to 70 staff in this sort of format, where I've been able to explain to staff colleagues where we are in our planning, how we are managing the situation, our ways of communicating the support offers we have, give reassurance about PPE, reinforce the need for staff, particularly BAME staff, to do their risk assessments, and most especially if something since the last time they had their risk assessment has changed, which might indicate a higher degree of potential risk to them. We put in an awful lot of additional support in for psychological welfare of staff, and just trying to be as flexible and supportive as we possibly can. If I may turn to the questions that were asked specifically, then there was a question about the movement in the age profile of inpatients. And I think perhaps this manifests because there was a lot of talk in the emergence of the second surge of a different age profile, i.e. younger people. And I think that is the case, and all the statistics sort of point to that. But the reality is that as we've settled back into how the disease is presenting and who are presenting with it, those particular younger individuals, if they do need to come to hospital, oftentimes they can be discharged very quickly and they don't get admitted, or they don't come at all because they don't have the underlying conditions and the ill health or the age and frailty that another cohort of our community would have. So our figures now are probably where they were previously in terms of 55% of our admissions are over 65. And at any given time, really, the number of admissions under 25 was only 5% of those cases. So quite small in terms of the impact on admissions to hospital, but not, as we know from what we see on the news, the spread of the virus out into the communities. What sorts of stresses are people feeling, the staff in particular, and how does sickness compare? Well, our run rate for sickness is usually between 4 and 5%. That's our kind of the rate that we would normally expect to see. By contrast, April, which I think was our worst month in terms of the effects of the pandemic, in aggregate, that's including staff reported sickness that relates to COVID, non-COVID, and the need for staff not to be at work through isolation relating to COVID. It was in the region of 13%. So a huge increase in absenteeism, not all necessarily because those staff had COVID, but the more general impact of COVID. During August, that reduced down, and we have, unsurprisingly, although we don't have all the figures, September, that has gone up again, but it's not as bad as April. And that's been compounded also by staff who have been shielding, those who have been forced to isolate because school children have been sent home, and until we got tests being able to be done for them. And so there's a number of reasons why we have not been able to enjoy the full complement of staff that we really needed to meet the demands of these increased numbers of patients. And how staff are feeling is, well, it's a range really from physically exhausted to more kind of deep-rooted psychological issues that are meaning that we're having to move staff away from COVID areas to give them some respite, doing something that doesn't require them to have to put full PPE in, because that has been, whilst they kind of were resilient enough to see it through in the first wave, the prospect again of going into this with everything else that is happening. And let's face it, I said this in this afternoon's meeting, there is a certain sort of positivity around summer and doing all this in summer, getting up in the sunshine, going home and having a few hours sunshine. When you do all this in the winter, it's really quite tiring and pretty exhausting and a bit grim, really. So you put all that into the mix and it's very difficult to engender that degree of teamwork and motivation, but we are trying to do that at every opportunity, and we will continue to do that. And our staff are they are still resilient and they are being positive and they are talking again about hearing some of the language about, well, I know we've done it before, we can do it again. That kind of approach, which is helpful. And then I think the final point was about the availability of tests, because that's been a very recurrent problem, both in hospital and out in the community, of course. We have a finite amount of testing capability within the organisation, and we share that across what we call the joint venture, which is ourselves and Airedale and Harrogate. So we have the opportunity to do about 600 tests a day, and that now is split between patients who are coming and they are inpatients. We're now including all staff, because to create additional capacity for community testing, we've been directed now not to send staff to the community facilities, but to consume their needs for testing within our own laboratory capacity. And that's probably, I'm looking at Paul, but I think it's about 400 tests a day probably for us. And we have to, carefully balance that. Some tests can be turned around quicker than others. So one of the tests that we do that has to go to the different laboratory will take about 8 hours to get the results back. We have a machine and the capability on site to do an hour's sort of turnaround on some testing. And we are awaiting some new equipment that we will put directly into places like A&E so that we can do even faster testing and give patients results and manage them appropriately on the either COVID or non-COVID pathways. So the final thing I just wanted to mention is that we, at the time we submitted our activity plans, we were also in negotiation around the amount of money that we would be allocated for the remainder of the financial year, the last 6 months of the financial year. Because up to that point, we weren't operating within a set budget, which is, I've never experienced that in my career, actually, in the NHS. We were, due to the circumstances we were operating in, we were able to draw down central money to pay for all the additional things we had to care for our COVID patients in a very unusual situation. For the latter part, understandably, the Department of Health wanted to really get a handle on its finances and to try and manage those and control those in a more robust way. And to do that, it has tried to allocate as much money as it believes that we will need for the remainder of the financial year. But I'll ask Matthew just to confirm the current position on that, if I may.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. So thank you, Mel. So as you're aware, normal business rules are on pause in terms of how we manage the finances in the NHS, and we've gone from the first 6 months of this year on a reclaim basis, basically submitting bills to the centre to say this is how much we've spent in delivering our activities. And that has changed from the 1st of October onwards, whereby the ICS has been allocated an overall quantum of around about £2.2 billion and is going through the process of allocating out that overall quantum to the healthcare organisations across the ICS. And initially at the place-based level and then down to organisational level. And we're all recognising that this is the direction of travel in terms of how money will be managed going forward, with very much a system and a place-based approach. And Mel's already mentioned around the partnership arrangement. So the money's being carved up into various pots in terms of what does your normal business as usual cost look like? What do you think you'll spend on COVID for the remainder of the year, and what does your restart programme look like? So we've made an assessment of our costs for the remainder of the year, which have been submitted to the ICS and have been consolidated into the overall plan, because the expectation is that the ICS will live within its funding allocation and will break even. I think it's fair to say there's still a slight challenge in terms of the draft plans that were submitted at the ICS level, so there's still work ongoing at organisational place and ICS level to try and identify what the opportunities might be to address that gap going forward. And it's not a huge gap at the moment on £2.2 billion. So we're continuing to look at our expenditure plans for the remainder of the year. But as Mel's mentioned, we have seen that the COVID numbers increase over recent weeks, which is placing quite a challenge on us delivering the full restart plan. So that's going to have a bearing on our cost forecast for the remainder of the year. But we still will be endeavouring to live within the overall allocation as an organisation, a place and an ICS. In addition to the revenue assumptions in terms of our normal income and expenditure, there's been a very different regime around capital as well. And we started off with a process when the first wave of the pandemic started, that we basically had to spend what we thought was reasonable to address the challenge, and we spent in the region of about £1.3 million at that time, and that has been on a reclaim basis, and the majority of that has been approved, and we're just waiting for some final pots of money to come through to recover the full cost. But we've also submitted a range of other bids around how do we make the organisation COVID secure and COVID safe for the future, and have been successful in acquiring about £5 million to support our urgent care and our A&E department in terms of investing in the infrastructure and the estate to make that COVID secure. That's quite a positive piece of news, and we've got a couple of other outstanding bids with the Centre and Treasury around our critical care and our diagnostic services, which hopefully then will enable us to transform both services to give us more resilience going forward. And hopefully in the next few weeks we'll get some confirmation as to whether those two pots have been secured. So we're in a very strange situation this year from a financial management perspective. You probably think this was a finance director's dream to live in a world where you just submit bills to the centre, but to be quite honest with you, it's been absolutely horrendous trying to track all of this. But we're getting there. I think we've got a good sight on where we think our forecast is for the remainder of the year, but noting that it likely will change if we continue to address the second wave of the pandemic and continue to reconfigure the hospital to make sure we can safely treat those patients. But clearly there will be more updates provided at the next governors meeting. So hopefully that was a reasonable summary in terms of where we are.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Mel, have you finished, or was there anything else you wanted to close on? Finished there, yeah? That's great. Thanks very much, Mel. Really, really useful. Thanks. Hopefully Governor colleagues will have picked up that Mel answered a few of those queries that were raised at the informal discussion between governors and myself. So I just want to thank Mel for dealing with that in such detail. She specifically picked out the questions that we'd noted at that discussion. So thanks for that. I know that there may be questions. I'll open for them in a moment, but I'm going to try and make this work. I'm going to go to Fahim, and I'll just unmute you, Fahim, yeah. A couple of things were raised in the early discussion with non-exec directors, Fahim, around our people policies, and it was to do with the governors recognise the excellent work that's being done in terms of well-being. We noticed the Wednesday Wellbeing Bulletin and all the fact that it remains a standing item on Regulation Committee, and governors wondered whether are we able to determine what the uptake is of any wellbeing initiatives, if we've got any ideas on the nature of any uptake by staff, and whether there are any particular themes that are known to us in terms of ill well-being, if you follow what I mean. So what's making people not well? So Fahim, I'm sorry to put you on the spot in the meeting, but I wonder if you're able to help a little with that, please.
So I think, thank you, Max. In terms of the internal initiatives that we've got and sort of the uptake of our risk assessments, we've had really good engagement from our workforce and our colleagues in terms of making sure that they carry out their own risk assessments. They're engaging with their line managers to do that. The use of our occupational health department has been really good. So our occupational health department has worked really hard and relentlessly throughout the COVID period in ensuring that we are able to provide advice and support to our staff. So the internal resources have been well used and continue to be well used throughout the organisation. Where we have had a number of wellbeing initiatives nationally launched that have been really helpful, but the uptake of those across the board has been low. So in terms of actually the use of those resources externally, it's the same with our trust, but nationally, I think what we've had is the uptake of those initiatives, those sort of helplines, hasn't been well utilised, and I think that may well have something to do with the fact that staff are actually still in and amongst the pandemic. They haven't had that breathing space to be able to actually step back and think about their own well-being. And I think Mel's covered this, in her discussion earlier. Staff are actually tired. They are at a point where actually all of that sort of adrenaline in the first wave isn't quite the same time around. They are still, committed, engaged, doing their level best. But those energy levels have dipped, and it is much harder in the second phase than it was in the first phase, but we continue to sort of provide support, etc. And as things change across the trust, we continue to monitor how we can do things differently for our staff and keep them motivated and engaged. I think we're doing lots of things like, on Twitter, some of you may have been seeing, but things like small sort of food packages, etc. So when they go to pick up their PPE, they are getting a little pack of sweets, all sorts of things. It's actually uplifting. But it's little things that really do make a difference to individuals. We're also putting in place sort of PPE guardians, so we've got colleagues who go and sort of help them with some of their PPE, and that engagement, sometimes does help, that personal touch. So they're getting those conversations in, and we've got volunteers from across different areas of the department who are choosing to go and work with their colleagues and give them some support on the wards. But yeah, in terms of usage of some of those resources, Max, externally it has been low.
Thank you very much, Wayne. That's extremely useful context and covers the points that were being raised. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, I'll open for questions. Alistair, you have a raised hand, and Karen, I think you may. I think you did. I don't know if it's okay. It's been dealt with. Thank you. That's great. So, Alistair, would you like to come in and ask your questions?
Thanks. Mel, thanks a lot for that summary. I've got a couple of questions, if it's okay. One of them is just around forward planning, depending on how much this wave continues on an upward trajectory. I think if I got it right, that in the first wave, the sort of general hospital closed down for normal activity was government imposed based on uncertainty about how we're going to handle it, and keeping some strength focused in the NHS. But in the current situation, obviously we know a lot more. So is there a sort of threshold at which you will need to start closing some departments, and what sort of departments would go first? Is my first question. My second one was around testing.
Okay, so I'll answer the first one, and then I might call on Paul if it's a technical testing question. So we received a letter from NHSI with an aspirational, an expectation that we would submit a plan that said for elective and daycare surgery in September, we would be up to 80% of our expected levels for the previous year of activity. In October, it's expected that we would be at 90% of our expected levels. But that was predicated on us believing that we would have a certain level, an underlying level of COVID in our midst, but not anything like the levels that we have experienced. We're already at 70% of the levels we saw at our peak now. So the impact is way and above the kind of 20%, I think, that the modelling suggested would enable us to do the 80% and the 90%. So we already have found ourselves, and I alluded to, in opening the second ITU, we had to close some theatre activity. But our commitment remains to continue to provide urgent and emergency surgery and significant cancer surgeries where to delay would cause harm to patients. So I think, and Sandra can probably clarify this, I think she alluded yesterday in our regulation committee to the fact that we acknowledged actually that we would never get to that aspirational target of 80% in September and 90% in October. I think yesterday Sandra was saying that we're doing something like 40% and probably in some instances less than 40% of that. Is that correct, Sandra? You're on mute.
I'll just bring you in, Sandra. Yeah, you're unmuted now, Sandra. Yeah.
Yes, we started to do very well actually in the once we got out of our peak of the pandemic, and we were actually ahead of our plan. And if we level out what we've done throughout the pandemic, we're probably by the end of this month predicted to be at 55% of elective activity against plan. But that is, as Mel says, that's significantly reduced from now going forward because we are pretty much back at the levels of the first peak. We are really making good opportunity, best use of the independent sector, and we're continuing to work to look at other options to utilise the independent sector as well, to make sure we do as much activity as possible. And still focusing very much on identifying patients whose disease progression is time sensitive. So we treat those patients first and then the very long waiting patients. So clinical priority remains our focus as always.
Thanks.
Question of Alistair about what would we keep doing? Whatever we can. So I met Sarge today actually and said the task is to do whatever we can. So if there is something that is discrete, like, you know, we can continue to do CT scanning, we can continue to do endoscopy to some extent, we can do, you know, those staff who are not going to get redeployed into clinical areas unless the numbers kind of go up and exceed the peak in the demand we saw last time. Anything we can do sensibly and safely, we will try and keep going.
And can I just quickly ask about the testing, if that's okay? I'm just intrigued about the test that's turned around in an hour. That must be new technology. I'm just wondering what it is, and can that be used at high capacity?
It's a limited capacity, but I'll let Paul answer that.
Hi, Alistair. Yeah, so I think Mel's just pretty much answered the sentence. The 1 hour turnaround test is what's called a CEFID test. It's a cartridge-based methodology. A lot of the problem with the test is the amount of prep. The problem is there's a shortage of the cartridges, so each trust is allocated per day. So we can't use them for mass testing. We use them to prioritise patients where we may put the patient at risk by putting them in an area that could have COVID if they themselves haven't got it. So, you know, so our vulnerable patients, things like that. So we're really trying to sort of be clear on the use of the CEFIDs. On top of that, Mel mentioned we are hoping early November to have some point of care testing that should make it a lot easier again to get more rapid testing turnaround done. But you know, I think testing wise, we're not doing too bad. But there are big asks on our testing facilities.
Yeah, I know about those. Yeah.
Thank you. Alistair, does that help?
Yeah. That's. I might come back to Paul offline. That's okay.
Of course, yes, of course. Okay, thank you, and thank you, Paul. Yeah. Thanks for coming back in on that. Yeah, I'm noting the chat box as well. That's great. Those of you that are posing queries and colleagues who are replying to those, thank you for that. At the end of this meeting, I'll make sure there's a record of that, and it can inform the minutes of the meeting. So thanks everybody for using that. Okay. I think in the absence of any further questions, I'll again thank Mel very much for all the time. I think we've timed it perfect for you, have we, Mel? You need to be away now, do you? Yeah, okay. We're at 16:49 on my computer. Let's just take 2 minutes, shall we? Just to come back a bit fresher for John and be able to give some attention to John with people partners in place and the corporate governance model. It's just rolled over to 16:50. Shall we start at 16:53 and let people have a quick leg stretch? Yeah. So a 3-minute leg stretch. Thanks, and then to bring you in, John. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, everybody, welcome back. I hope you can all... Will somebody wave at me if they can hear me okay? I'm coming through, am I? Yeah? Great. Thanks very much. That's lovely. Okay, thanks. I've just had a note, actually, from Karen, and, you know, I'm sure I don't want to start any fallouts amongst our exec colleagues when everything's going so well, but John, would you mind if I just bring Karen in briefly before your own briefings, please? Who cares? There you go. Yeah, okay. Karen has just advised me, I think you've got another commitment, Karen, haven't you? You have to go to, and you're here particularly to advise Governor colleagues on our new charity initiative. So I'll bring you straight in, Karen, and we'll hear from you now. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll be brief because I think you've had the link circulated as part of the agenda. So you will see that we are in the process of launching our charity fundraising to build a £500,000 parents, additional parents accommodation to our neonatal unit. So what would have normally happened if we hadn't have had COVID, we would have written a fundraising campaign document by this point, and we would be well into approaching big bidders, etc., to help with that. But COVID's put everything a bit on pause. So the plan is that the fundraising campaign documents and how we're going to do that comes later in the year, but at the moment we've started a soft launch. So there is a link there for people to see. It takes you to a video of why this is needed, the plans of the additional bedrooms and facilities, the target of £500,000, and it also takes you through to the Just Giving link. So if people can be aware of that, pass messages. If you are a friend of a multimillionaire, please let them know. But you know, anything you can do to support this, whilst we're working up the fundraising campaign, to do that in, you know, better times almost, because normally now we're out shaking buckets at football matches and in the town centre, and obviously we can't fundraise in those same ways. So any help will be greatly received. So that's the neonatal campaign. In addition to that, I've also sent to Jackie earlier today a link to our Christmas campaign. So we've got a number of initiatives for Christmas. So for the last 2 years, we've run the Sparkle for Axel campaign, which is to provide toys and gifts for children in the hospital over Christmas time. And that's in the memory of a young man, Axel, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago. And that's been really successful. You can also sponsor a snowflake, and we're hoping to have some decorations at the front of the building in addition to a Christmas tree this year. The decorations are being bought to be sensitive so that they can be used for all celebrations throughout the year, so whether that be Eid or Diwali, so they'll be multi-use. And you can also buy your Christmas cards from the hospital charity as well. So there's a number of ways for people to support the charity, and we would love you to get behind us and help with that. Thank you.
That's great, Karen. Thanks very much. Jackie, can I just check with you that link has been circulated? I'm not sure it's on my WebEx. I just wanted to be sure that link to the charity fundraising has been circulated to Governor Collins.
Yes, it has. Yeah, the link's included.
Is it there?
The agenda.
It's me that's not seen.
It might be that you can't access it because it's PDF, but we'll send it out again to the governors, and the email that Karen mentioned earlier as well. That has been, I believe, I'll check with Sheridan, but I think that's been circulated round to governors as well.
Perfect. That's great. Thanks very much, Jackie. Okay. So with the exception of a couple of reports to note, Regulation Committee and Audit and Assurance Committee, and I'll try and deal with any questions that may be relating to those. I'm going to offer now John the chance of a good 25-30 minutes for his couple of items. So it's a bit squeezed, I'm sorry, John. But I know you're going to talk to us about people, partners and place, our ongoing strategy, and developing our corporate governance model. So thank you, John, and thanks for holding on for that.
Yeah, no worries at all, Max. I'm going to try and share my screen. We have circulated this material, so I'm hoping everybody has had the opportunity to see it. Let's see if I can call up the right document. If I don't succeed, I'll just plough on anyway.
That's you. You're starting to share content now, John.
Yeah, okay. So let's
yes, we've got both up. Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah, it has indeed. People, partners and place.
People, partners and place. Okay, so colleagues might remember if we... here we go back. So if we go back to the early spring, which feels like about 100 years ago now, before COVID-19, we had the intention of publishing a forward-looking document, and the working title was 2020 Vision for obvious reasons. It just seemed to work. And I recall giving a presentation, perhaps it was a Council of Governors or one of the smaller focus groups, I can't remember. We talked about this. Since then, well, a lot's happened. A lot of it has been to do with COVID-19, but there's been a lot of things come out of that which are really helpful in terms of what we'd want to say about how we work in the future. So something about kindness, you know, we've got our kind of spirit of kindness, our commitment to that, kindness and well-being. We've learned a lot, I think, about what it takes to support our BAME colleagues through COVID, and I think it's helped us as an organisation frame that better. There's been a real growth in the idea of our place, our Bradford Districts and Craven Place, and Act as One, which is now the umbrella term for the programmes of work that we're doing together to look after our population's health and to improve access to services. So that's been a very big deal. And, you know, enabling all of this, there's been an awful lot of work digitally in every different dimension. So whether it's kind of virtual outpatients or remote working, support people at home, lots and lots of work digitally. So though we would never have wished a pandemic, actually, I think importantly, we haven't let the opportunity pass us by to learn things from that. And then, of course, there have been other developments unrelated to COVID, which also happened in the kind of intervening period. So CQC confirmed a rating of good for the trust, which is fantastic news, and in any other circumstances would have been able to make a much bigger fuss of it. We've launched our outstanding maternity services programme to celebrate what we do, but also to really drive continuing improvement in that area of work. And we've continued to work on a larger scale across West Yorkshire with the Health and Care Partnership and with the other acute trusts, the WIAT, West Yorkshire Association of Acute Trusts. So all of those things together actually put us in a slightly different place from where we would have been had we published something in April anyway. And here's where we are now. We now want to publish, if that's the right word, our kind of thinking for the year ahead, and we've styled it People, Partners and Place. And this tries to kill several birds with one stone. It reflects where we are now, celebrates some of the good things going on, and it sets out a simple, coherent narrative for the year ahead. The other thing it does, importantly, is it kind of acts as a bridge. So it takes you from where we are with our current corporate strategy, published in 2017, into the engagement we need to do for our next corporate strategy. So this document I'm talking about today, People, Partners and Place, is not the corporate strategy for the Trust. We already have one of those, it's still extant, and we're going to start working towards our next one. It's a natural thing to do 4 years into a 5-year cycle that you begin on the next one. But I am conscious that when we pulled the 2020 vision, there was a concern that somehow, oh my goodness, we're rudderless. We haven't got our 2020 vision. We don't know what we're doing. There is no plan. Couldn't be further from the truth. We still have our existing strategy. We've got some really good work going on with our clinical business units. We've got lots of initiatives, like I already mentioned, the outstanding maternity services and so on. But perhaps what we've lacked is a place where we pull all that together into a coherent narrative to tell the story and describe how we want to go forward. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to publish something, People, Partners and Place, in a variety of formats. As you would expect me to say, I see this being very much a kind of fleet of foot, digital, virtual thing. Yes, we can produce hard copies because I know digital doesn't work for everybody, but the opportunity of digital websites, intranets, screensavers, screens across the trust, tweets, LinkedIn, Facebook is massive. And that's what we want to do. So if you've had a look through the material I've sent you, you will know one of the documents is this. It's our kind of plan on a page. And perhaps in the old world, if we were meeting face to face, I'd have printed this up, A1, A0, massive size, a big poster on the wall. Every meeting room would have one of these. Well, we can simulate that virtually. We can do that. And you'll see on here, we've listed 14 key things that we're doing. There isn't much here that's brand new. We're not trying to pull a rabbit from the hat and say, wow, here's a surprise. What we're doing is telling a coherent story of where we are and where we're going, what it feels like to be part of this organisation, what our ambition is, the scale of our ambition to serve our population. I've already taken this through the non-exec directors and the rest of the board on one occasion. We've tweaked some of these to reflect that. There's a further opportunity in this discussion today for you to think about things that you'd like to draw to my attention. We could do more of, differently, or so on. I know it looks kind of finished, and polished, and visually very nice. Well, I hope you think that. But we can change this. It is a draft. It remains for engagement. We do want to get it out soon. Otherwise, we kind of miss the window, and we want to do this for our staff. But there's a real genuine opportunity today to comment. And if I move on from this, what you'll see, and I'm going to flick through these very quickly, is imagine this as a slideshow. Imagine this as a set of screensavers. Imagine this scrolling through all of our virtual screens across all of the trust sites here, St Luke's, Westbourne, Westwood Park, and so on. Lots of different ways we could use this. Individual tweets about different aspects of it. An introduction from Mel talking about, remember what we said earlier on, how we act as one, and that's the way we deliver happy, healthy, and at home. We've got 3 ambitions around people, partners, and place. So here's what people means, and it's those things I talked about in Plan on a Page. That was people both as our population, but here's people as our colleagues. Our partners right across the system, our place here in Bradford, Districts and Craven, with emphasis on the trust as an anchor organisation, not an acute that's hiding away behind the walls, but outward looking, working with our community, supporting them. There's our values. So my questions for you are, is the content appropriate? Are there ambitions you'd like to see added, changed or removed? I can't promise you to keep adding stuff. In fact, I would almost challenge you. If you say to me, yeah, John, you've forgotten to mention, underwater hospitals. Well, that's great. I'll add them. But what we're going to take off, because we're not going to keep adding to the list. Everything can't be a priority or nothing's a priority. And what about tone and emphasis? So we've really gone large on partnership working here, and that's unashamed. It sends a very powerful message. But you might think, in doing that, we've slightly lost focus on the trust. Well, it's a spectrum, and we could all argue about whether we need to be on that spectrum, but I welcome your views on that. And the plan is deliberately high level. This is not, please don't say to me, all right, where's the delivery for every individual item? This is not the plan. But if you look at any of those components, if you said to Karen, tell me how you're going to do outstanding maternity services, she could talk to you about the plan and the details and so on. What this is the narrative. It's telling the story, and it is necessarily high level. And finally, formats. I'm going large on the digital. You might want to say to me, don't forget the digitally excluded. Let's have an easy read version and so on and so on. Final point I would make is we floated the idea of publishing this next week to coincide with a proposed system-wide launch of Actors 1. First of all, I don't think this will be ready to launch next week, not least because I want to hear what you've got to say. But secondly, I also think the Actors 1 launch has now been slipped from next week. I believe, I haven't been told that officially, but I believe that's going a bit later. So let's not worry too much about the precise timing of that. Thanks, Max. Those are the questions, and I'll try and return to everybody's faces if I can.
That's great, John. That's really helpful. Thank you. Governors, obviously, nobody's expected to have taken it all in immediately and consider things you want to say now, but John is receptive to receiving any feedback on the content of that's been circulated through Jackie. Welcome that. If anybody wants to make any immediate comments, we'd be happy to take them, and then we'll ask John to go on to the next item. So Dermot, I can see you'd like to come in. So Dermot, then Pauline. Yep, Dermot and Pauline, and Stella. Yep, Dermot, Pauline, Stella.
Thanks, Max. Thanks, John. I really like it. Is the first thing. My particular comment was on the area around partners. But I noticed that the partners it talks about really are focused on the regional partners, and the West Yorkshire Association of Acute Trusts and the Health and Care Partnership, all really important. But an awful lot of our work, and especially with Actors 1, of course, is around local partnerships with Airedale, with the Care Trust, with the Council, the CCG, and that isn't reflected within the partnership side of things. Maybe it's implied within Actors 1, maybe it's somewhere else. But it's kind of important here. We've got Alistair here as our partner governor. The university are an important partner as well, and we need to reflect some of that local partnership work, and I think that will have greater meaning to more people than some of these regional partnerships, which are important.
Thanks, Dermot. John, would you like to?
Yes, it's the third P, Dermot. It's place. We've done it under place.
Okay, no, but points well made, Dermot, and noted. Thank you. Pauline, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I also support the ethos, but what I was wondering about was about the Actors 1. I've noticed it on the email page, and I had a few staff said to me, well, what is this Actors 1? What's happened to Hello, My Name is, and I didn't really know much about it. So I don't know whether it's actually been missed, from either the email, because it just appeared, and I didn't realise, and a number of staff, even in my team, didn't seem to be aware of it. So I'm just trying to think about how to make sure that we promote, using different, campaigns and different mechanisms to be able to share, what does it mean?
That's really useful feedback, Pauline. John, yeah?
Yeah, this isn't the place for a long answer, Pauline. I think I already said the system-wide launch was due to happen next week. It's been deferred. In the meantime, Pauline, we've publicised it in the Let's Talk magazine. We've now got a dedicated page on the intranet. But I'm not going to disagree with you. It's one thing to stick the logo on our email signatures. It's another to kind of embed the understanding and get the buy-in from everybody. And I think we've got a lot more work to do there. So I wholeheartedly agree with you. But there will be a system launch, and that will give us a kind of platform to then really talk about it within our organisation.
Thank you. Thanks, Pauline. Thanks, John. I agree with your point there, Pauline. Yeah, thank you. Stella, you are unmuted, so you can talk immediately. Thanks. We're listening.
Yes, I thought it was commendable but how do we share and work together? And how do we act as partners? And what does the idea mean for everybody? Because we're all patients of the NHS.
Thank you, Stella. Thoughts, John?
Well, I'm happy to have a go, but I wonder if I'm bouncing it. I wonder if a clinician would rather answer. Karen, did you want to have a go at that, about what it means to work as a system differently? I can give you the patter, but
thank you, Johnny.
So I'm not sure if I understand the question. So let me answer what I think you're asking, Stella. So how does working as a place space in partnership benefit us as patients? Is that what the gist of it is? You're nodding. Okay, so I'll give you an example. So Actors 1 is across the place, so Bradford, Airedale, wider. There are 7 work streams within that. One of the work streams is respiratory. I am the senior responsible officer for the respiratory work stream. What I've done is I've brought lots of people together from BCS, Care Trust, local authority, etc., to look at respiratory. And we started in the summer with this work. And what we've been able to do is have some really good clinical conversations about the patient and what is best for the patient. And how we approached it was there's a COVID winter approaching. What could we do now to prepare for that as a respiratory system group? And that was the flu jab. Everybody gets your flu jab. And then what other little bits could we do as well? And we've done some work around the digital hub so that people can be referred for further advice, some work around inhaler techniques. We've also had a bit of a launch event that had about 60 people at, including patient representatives as well. And from that came up other ideas and things to do as well. So it's very much about in it for the long haul. Clinicians having joined up conversations, but here's the crux of it. Because everybody's focused on doing something different and beneficial for patients or people or citizens, whatever term you use, the conversations are happening without the discussion about, yes, but how would you fund that? How would you do that? How would you move the money? Yes. Now, what I'd say is we've only done small tests of change now that don't involve wholesale money. So the proof of the pudding will be in the eating when we do suddenly say, and acute trust, you won't be seeing those. We're going to do that at a PCN level. But the whole ethos is about doing the right thing for the patient as a system, using voluntary care, primary care, mental health trust, community care, everything, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks.
Is that helpful, Stella?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the additional context, Karen. Really useful. Yeah, that's great. Okay. Shall we let John move on now to developing our corporate governance model? We'll talk a little bit about waterborne assurance and where we're going. So, John, over to you again. Are you sharing slides again?
I'm going to have a go.
Yeah, great.
Let's see how I get on.
Thank you. Thanks everyone on that. I'll just add maybe, Stella, that from an organisational perspective, I think of the strategic partnering agreement and the idea that we have all signed up to say that when we take a decision internally, we will consider the impact upon our partners within the wider system. So from an organisational sense, that's how I think about Actors 1. So and it's a really positive thing in Bradford, by the way. So,
absolutely. Yes.
Excellent. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Can you see the screen developing?
Yes, we can. Thanks, nice and clearly. Yeah.
Okay. So once again, I have circulated this. I'm conscious of time. This will only take a couple of hours. If you could just bear with me. So, I'm very pleased to say that last time CQC came in, they decided that Bradford Teaching Hospitals was good for the well-led category. So, this is not a broken organisation with governance that doesn't work and. We're well led and we've got independent assurance of that, but we shouldn't be complacent. We shouldn't, rest on our laurels. We need to continue to improve. Mel invited an independent review of the effectiveness of our government arrangements earlier in the year, and we got an initial report in February from an independent expert who said, well, you are good, but you've got room to be better, which is kind of, I think, exactly what we wanted to hear. So one of the strands of that was that our governance model was perceived as a bit of an industry, a bit over-engineered. Now, look, you can never get this right. You can have too much or too little, it's Goldilocks. You can never quite get the right sized bed. It's really difficult. But there was a perception that we'd probably kind of gold plated it and then done a bit more and then done a bit more. A classic example of that was the kind of volume and sequence of meetings and papers. So we had reams and reams of paper coming to the board. It was almost impossible to get your head around all of it. And that's false comfort. That isn't assurance. That's almost impossible to assure when you've got that much stuff. And the sequence of meetings didn't always make as much sense as it might have done. And what we really wanted to do was focus on outcomes and make sure our assurance was based on a connection to the front line, as Max has already said, from ward to board. So that kind of set the tone for what we wanted to do. And then here's a common theme for everything I've said today. Along came COVID. So in response to COVID, we simply couldn't do all of the meetings we were doing every month and all of the time that tied up. But neither could we just suspend governance and let ourselves off the hook. So we streamlined. Everything became virtual, everything became online, and we suspended our regular committees. And in their place, we created a single regulation and assurance committee, which gave us the backstop, which gave us the confidence that we'd have an audit trail, we'd be able to account for the decisions we made and the oversight, but it wasn't the same as all the committees were replaced. That gave us time to focus on the pandemic, and it reduced some of the treadmill of governance, some of the downside. But what it also did, and I think possibly this was unexpected, was it gave us a better discussion. So it was a place where we had, if you like, a committee of the whole board coming together and talking about quality and talking about finance and talking about performance and people in more of a kind of holistic way than we had done when we had one committee over here worrying about money and another committee over here worrying about people. It's hard to explain, but if you lived through it, you would understand what I meant. And I guess the final point to say is our ambition, and Mel's instigated a programme for this, is moving to outstanding. Good enough is not good enough. And governance is just the same as every other aspect of what we do. We want to move to outstanding. We want to be an outstanding organisation. We want outstanding governance. So what we're trying to achieve, keep the benefits of what we've learned from our streamlining, from our COVID experience and so on. In the NHS, there's a hashtag, no going back. Well, we're not going back. We need to keep moving forward. We need to get the balance right. We want the right conversation, the right place, with the right people at the right time. That's what good assurance feels like. Added value, not just basically, reams and reams of papers so we can say, oh, look how busy we are. But that means about getting it right, not simply sort of saying, oh, we don't need to do governance, we'll do it on a slide. We've got to get it proportionate. And it's been really helpful thinking about that. It's quite hard work. It's not everybody's favourite subject, but I think we've all benefited from kind of working through it. So what we're talking about here in terms of assurance, it's having a robust governance framework. It's being mature about risk management, what's our appetite and what we're prepared to live with, and having good internal controls. Not everything in triplicate, but the right question, the right conversation at the right time. So we've had a further independent review saying to us, okay, if you want to move to a new model, if you're now thinking about a new model, here's what you need to bear in mind. And if you want to learn from your COVID experience. And here essentially is what we've proposed, what the latest review has been helping us look at. So we no longer have a separate partnerships committee, not because we don't think partnerships is important, but almost the opposite, because we think partnerships fundamentally underpins everything we do. It is now part of the core business of the board. We act as one in everything we do. So that's where we have our partnerships conversation. We're not going to have a separate workforce or quality or finance and performance committee anymore. Not because we don't think those things are important, but because we've learned the lesson that says, actually, if they're a bit remote and separate, you lose some of the focus. So the pure kind of regulatory oversight, if you like, is in future going to be done in a separate regulation committee. Instead, what we're having is academies, one for people, one for quality, and one for finance and performance. And the beauty of the academy is there is an assurance component, but there's also a learning component and an improvement component. And that kind of holy trinity is really important. If a report comes in and says to us, we've got an issue, we've got the right people in the room to then say, well, what do we learn from that? And how do we turn that into an improvement agenda? As I say, we're going to keep the regulation committee, which we invented as an expediency during COVID. It gives us a place to have a holistic conversation about oversight and insurance. All of these things together give us more headroom in the board for more of a strategic discussion where we can think about systems and partnerships, and we can focus on the most significant risks and themes coming up from the academies and the regulation committee. And perhaps in future, we do a bit less of the 300 pages of homework. I mean, I caricature it, but that is a bit how it's felt. And we really need to get that balance right. And we will, of course, retain our audit committee, which is the assurance of the assurance, are the processes robust and so on. Our charitables committee, and Karen was alluding to some of the work earlier on, nominations and remuneration. It's wrong to obsess about losing committees and gaining academies, but just by way of example, to give you a feel for the kind of change of tone and emphasis we're looking for. On the left, we have the kind of previous committee structure. On the right, we kind of have the future academy. I'm not going to go through them line by line. You can see the difference in kind of tone and emphasis. Focus of the academy, assurance, improvement, learning. It's got a wider cast list, system-wide. It's not just a few senior people in the trust. It really is ward to board, and we've got commissions in there. We've got other experts. We've got other stakeholders. It can be more fleet of foot. It can be more responsive. We can use metrics that tell us, you know, are we really making a difference? And we can bring that kind of system and partnership focus in a way that wasn't always easy in a committee. This is a work in progress. It's not a done deal. And this is, you know, if I'm really honest with you, this is a slightly uncomfortable feeling because governance really matters. At the end of the year, you know, Mel is going to have to sign off a statement of assurance as the CEO to say that she's satisfied. Max, as the chair of the board, and the non-execs will be holding ourselves to account. But actually, you know, we are in a period of change. We are transitioning. So we started this in September and October. Transitional period may be 6 months. Actually, our independent advisors say it could be a year. So there's something here about evolution, about making sure we don't drop the ball. That's why we keep having the regulation committee, but giving ourselves a bit of space to try and develop and improve so that we get that assurance, learning and improvement. And we move on from a kind of very transactional, very paper-heavy approach. We've got the independent assurance. They've given us a series of recommendations. We were discussing those only this week in our regulation committee. They kind of become the action plan for the way forward. And when Laura, our new board sec, arrives, it's almost like a part of the job plan for her to say, okay, so I'm reporting in future on how we're doing against those recommendations. There are risks too, which the independent advisors highlighted for us. So, you know, we mustn't lose the assurance. It needs to be there, but it's a different kind of assurance. We can't just do everything in triplicate in future. We need to make sure we have the right conversation at the right level. This is not just about a change in process. It's about a change in culture and a change in behaviour. You need transitional arrangements so that at the end of the year, you can show how you manage through the change. And it needs to be underpinned by information, good information flows, timely information flows, the right question at the right time. And finally, of course, we'll build in a periodic review so that we don't just say, that's it now, we've done it, off we go. We'll keep checking back to make sure that this is achieving the change that we want it to. So I'll stop there, Max, and I'll try and unshare again.
That's perfect, John. Thanks very much indeed. Okay, so one of the things that arises, of course, John, it was touched on at the end of the meeting just with non-exec directors, is the potential role of for governors in academies. And that might change. And it's a pity in some ways. It's not something I've had the chance to discuss with governor colleagues. I'm happy to discuss perhaps with David and Wendy in the first place as lead governor and vice chair. I think that it presents a different challenge because having just got over that hurdle of getting you to come to committees, and that was good news, and seeing the non-execs chairing those committees. Of course, what we've designed here now, and it's not for any reason working with governors, but they are exec-led with an operational focus, these meetings. I think the potential for the academies, for governors, that they'd be too close to trust business, given that your main role, of course, is holding the non-executive body to account. but it will be a function of all the academies to determine a form of public engagement themselves. And it may be they can write into that an opportunity to involve governors. So I only throw that into the mix. It would be inappropriate, it'd be remiss of me not to be fair and tell you that. This is all under consideration. In fact, John, at our regulation committee yesterday, we talked at length, didn't we, about Laura Parsons's work plan as Laura arrives with us. I know Laura's still with us observing the meeting, so this work is really forming very much part of Laura's initial time with us. As soon as she comes, there'll be all that to work through. So there's no way, you know what I'm like as a chairman, I want the governors to feel completely involved and part of the progress of the hospital, about us being serious about outstanding. But I have to be honest and say to you, I'm not sure that academies would be the right place for governors to be there. I'm comfortable to have that discussion, of course, as we move on. John, is there anything you'd add to that, or have I probably articulated it as reasonably?
No, I wouldn't change any of that. I think that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So, Jackie, would you like me to bring you in? And I'll open up for questions. So, Jackie, yes, you first.
Yeah, it's just I think Amit is having trouble communicating that he has some points that he wishes to raise, and so he wonders if you could,
Thank you.
Mute
I
him.
haven't forgotten Amit, and I'll bring him in. Yes, okay. Well, in fact, there are no hands showing us up, so I'll do that now. So, Amit, I know you can hear me, we can't hear you, so you are unmuted. Amit, yes, would you like to ask any questions?
Yes, so sounds like I'm audible now.
Yes, you are. Yes, we can hear you clearly, thanks, yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to add comments on 3 of the business items that we discussed in this session. So starting from the last 2 presentations that we saw, I felt they were good, but it would have helped to have a slide number on each slide. And then it is possible to refer to them, without having the visual clue in front of everyone. So that's a slight amendment to how we share slides that I would recommend. Substantively, there was a reference to partnership. And of course, I think Dermot mentioned that we don't think just regionally, but also locally, and he's quite right. But I'll go in the other direction as well. We also need to think nationally, and if we have the potential to become a national exemplar, try and have those partnerships as well. After all, we are a teaching hospital. We are more than just the district hospital. We have additional potential, and if we achieve something of value, that can benefit wider England, wider Britain, wider world, and so on. So those were 2 points there. The third point I had was about the GAC election. Now, as you remember, I used to be governor before as well. And in those days, there were 2 organizations. One was called the Foundation Trust Governors Association, and one was called Foundation Trusts something or other. So that was the second organization, I believe, has morphed into NHS providers. And the FTGA, which was an independent organization, has probably morphed into GAC because it has the same and slightly irrational constraints, which you were asking Jackie about when that item was being discussed. And I'll explain how and why that is irrational. So there is one constraint which says that if you are a foundation trust, you can be our member, and then we treat you as we treat the trust as a member rather than treating individual governors as members. And in turn, trusts do the voting and trusts do the nominations. And I was lucky, I should say, to have someone like Pauline also serving in the previous foundation trust where I was involved. There was another staff governor who was serving on the FTGA board, as it was then called. And that meant that because she was already from my trust, I could not get involved. And they have carried that through. And now the same rule applies to this particular committee. And I would propose through Pauline that this is an irrational rule and it needs to change. As things stand, I would like to support Pauline for all sorts of reasons, including she is doing a good job. And also from a purely practical standpoint, you have been given just 250 words. It is a lot easier for someone who is incumbent to write something sensible, either focusing on motivation or focusing on achievement or writing a little bit about both, than it is for a newcomer to use those 250 words to write about both their motivation and their achievement as a statement for election. So just on that basis, I would say it's better that Pauline is re-recommended rather than someone like me putting my hat into the putting my nomination into the hat. But I would say fundamentally what Pauline brings to the table as a staff governor and what someone like me can bring to the table as a public governor are two very different things. And this rule is irrational and it needs to change. And I would like to make that recommendation to GAC through Pauline, please.
Thanks very much, Amit. Your points were very clearly heard and they've all been noted. Thank you. Pauline, you mentioned something in the chat there about hold organisation to account. Was there something you wanted us to elaborate on there?
Yeah, I just noticed that. Sorry.
Yeah, we can hear you. You're coming through, yes.
It's changed from, did it say holding the executive to account to organisation?
For governors, do you mean? Or?
Oh, no, I just went in the information that John shared.
Oh, I'm sorry. John, maybe I've misunderstood Pauline's point. If you can help us, that'd be great.
It was on one of the slides, and I think it's shorthand. I mean, look, I put it up on a slide, so I ought to be able to explain it, but I think it's part of me trying to describe the cultural difference of the new approach, that rather than a sort of Spanish Inquisition where we line people up against the wall and say, why did you do this? Rather, it's about really get behind the question and have a slightly different kind of conversation about what do we learn from this, what's the improvement challenge it gives, and that's never about one person, often not even about one system or one process. It's about really holistically doing things differently. But I accept actually, hold the organisation to account is probably too shorthandy and doesn't quite do a good enough job of explaining it. I'll take that. I'll learn and improve from that, Pauline.
Thank you. Thanks, Pauline. And Mark, I note your question. There isn't a perfect answer for how we replace the knowledge that would have been got from committees, other than to bring to your attention that the Regulation Committee, of course, is a new 3-hour session of pure assurance discussions to which governors are welcome. So there is a form of opportunity to take that, and perhaps we should consider, increasing the number of governors that would go to that. But I accept that there's some loss there with the move from committees to academies. I do accept that. Okay. I'm going to ask whether there's any further questions, in particular in relation to John's items. Alistair, would you like to come in?
A really quick comment.
Of course, yes. Yeah.
Very quickly, John, I just want to say I think this is really good stuff. I mean, there's such a thing as bad bureaucracy and there's such a thing as good bureaucracy. And you're trying to target things around good bureaucracy that is useful. So I think it's really, really positive.
Well, that perspective is very much appreciated, Alistair. Thank you for that positive comment. Okay, shall I bring the meeting towards a close now by asking were there any items? Governors are advised of the 2 Regulation Committee reports from the 29th of July and 23rd of September. There is a monthly Regulation Committee, but I must admit we did take some downtime in August, so there was no meeting there. And Audit and Assurance Committee, 10th of September, the meeting there. Barry has had to leave this particular call, but did text me to say if there are any questions governors have of the Audit Committee report, he'd be very happy to deal with them directly by email. So they would be directed through Jackie, please. He hopes, I think, as I do, that the discussion we had at the earlier meeting, just with non-execs, might have covered the things that you had a particular interest in with Barry. Okay. There being no other business, I think we've come to the end of the meeting. I do want to share with you, unfortunately, Sandra just had to leave us there at 5:30. And typically, you know, I do recognise that the pressure all our exec colleagues are under. But this, in fact, is Sandra's last meeting. I will pass, of course, all you governors' good wishes to Sandra. We took the opportunity to do the same at Regulation Committee yesterday, which, as I say, is a full board meeting, so everybody was there. But Sandra has done an absolutely fantastic job here, actually, as Chief Operating Officer, under incredibly challenging circumstances. And there's a certain, I mean, I do smile at this. There's a certain irony that, you know, everything was going the right way for us in terms of performance until a global pandemic hit us, of course, from sort of February, March onwards. But some of the achievements that Sandra had actually made, you look at our cancer 2-week waiting times, they're the best in Yorkshire. You know, so some of the achievements she'd made were absolutely terrific, best in West Yorkshire, I should say. So, you know, that's what Sandra's done for us. So I will, of course, pass your best wishes on to her. And I'm sorry, I didn't know until she sent me the note to say that she had to go to another WebEx. And she'd have only been embarrassed listening to me saying these things anyway, wouldn't she? So, although that would have been good to see. I'd like to see red cheeks. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that. If there's no further comments, I think we're done. We have, I think, Jackie, an extraordinary governors NRC meeting next, don't we? So hang on, I'll unmute you and you can come in, Jackie. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, before we do that, I believe you asked for a quick 5 minutes with the governors, Max, just in private session before we start the NRC meeting to provide an update on a particular issue.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. So I will stop the record in a moment then when we formally close the meeting and we'll go into a private session, okay? Yeah? All right. So, Julie, do you need to come in there? Yeah.
I thought we were going.
Yes, they're going. Yeah.
We're going as non-execs. So I was just saying bye.
Yeah, so that's fine. So yeah, we can all go. That's it. So Jackie, just let me be sure, because I'm obviously trying to manage things here. So is it just myself and the non-execs we're asking to stay for the?
No, it's just the you and the governors that we're asking to stay at the moment.
Myself and the governors for the brief closed session.
Then we'll move into the NRC meeting that we've got planned.
That's it. Okay. So thanks, everybody. Hopefully you found that a useful meeting, lots of content, and very much appreciated. So thanks to non-exec colleagues and exec colleagues indeed who've been with us. So if governors would hang on, we'll go into a closed meeting. And thank you, everybody. Saj, Fahim, thanks very much for your help. Yeah. Okay. So I will stop